Okay, I don't know why I'm doing this. Hold on. Let me turn the lamp so I can see the buttons. Okay, the red light is on. It's recording. I found this thing in the bottom drawer of Dad's desk, under a stack of repair manuals from 1987, and a broken weather radio that I always meant to fix and never did. The tape's a Bassavaf chrome cassette, 60 minutes, and it had about 20 minutes of someone playing guitar on it. Someone who wasn't Dad, who couldn't play guitar, so I don't know what that's about, but I recorded over it. The sound quality isn't going to be great. The heads on this deck need cleaning. But I figure if I'm going to keep talking to myself like I've been doing for the last 8 days, I might as well have something to show for it. My name is Garrett Hale. I'm 38. I repair radio equipment, CB radios, shortwave receivers, old ham gear, vintage audio stuff. I have a workshop on Haller Road outside of Breeden, Kentucky. Population, before all this, was around 3,200. I don't know what the population is now. I don't want to guess. I guess this is a record of what happened, of what's still happening. I'm not doing this for posterity or anything like that. I'm doing it because I've been in this workshop for 8 days, and I started talking to a CB radio last night, and when I caught myself doing it, I realized that was probably worse than talking to a tape recorder. At least the tape recorder is clearly an object. The CB radio was my father's, and there's still a part of me that keeps expecting him to answer. He won't. He died 2 years and 3 months ago. Heart attack. He was 68 and alone in this same workshop, surrounded by the same equipment, and he fell off the stool he always sat on when he was doing fine work on capacitors, and he was dead before he hit the floor. That's what the coroner said. I'm telling you this because it matters for what comes later. The workshop, the radio, all of it. It all connects back to him, and I'm still not sure how to feel about that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. I'll tell you about the radio later. The first thing I knew was wrong was the smell. I was driving into Breeden on a Tuesday morning. This was day 0, I guess, before I was counting days. And I had the window down because it was that in-between seasons weather, where the air feels like it can't make up its mind. Warm and cool at the same time. The kind of morning where you don't want to close yourself in. I had the radio on, the truck's radio, just whatever was playing. I think it was a country station out of Lexington. And I smelled something burning. Not a campfire. Not trash burning, which some people still do out here on the back roads. Something heavier, acrid, like rubber or insulation wire when it gets too hot. I didn't see smoke right away. I drove through town, went to the post office to pick up a package, a tube-type stereo tuner someone in Ohio had sent me for restoration, and the woman at the counter, Marlene, she was watching something on her phone, with this expression I can't quite describe. Not scared exactly. Uncertain, like she was waiting to find out if she was supposed to be scared. She didn't say anything to me. I signed for the package. I said, "Have a good one." She said something, but I don't think it was "have a good one" back. I went to the hardware store, bought some contact spray, and a package of 3.5 amp fuses. Jerry, who runs the place, was on his phone too, phone to his ear. He was saying something low that I couldn't make out. He rang up my stuff and gave me my change, and didn't meet my eyes. When I walked out, he immediately went back to the phone. I remember thinking something was off, but not knowing what it was. I noticed things like voltage and signal drift and solder quality. I am not always good at noticing human things. I got back to the workshop and started on the Ohio tuner. There's a very specific kind of peace in opening up an old piece of equipment. The smell of the old dust inside. The particular faint sweetness of deteriorating rubber washers. The way everything is laid out with a logic to it. The engineer's intention still visible 40 years later. My father liked to say that machines were honest. They showed you exactly what they were doing and why. People, he said, rarely did that. He wasn't wrong. I worked until about noon. I had the shop radio on low, not the CB, just a little transistor AM, FM I keep on the workbench. And then a regular song ended, and there was a pause that went on about 4 seconds longer than usual, and then someone said, "We're being asked to advise listeners in Hardin, Marion, and LaRue counties that there are reports of violent disturbances in several communities. Emergency services are responding. Residents are asked to remain indoors until further, and then it cut out and the song came back. I stopped what I was doing. I sat there and listened for a while, but the song just played through, and the next song started, and there was no more interruption. I went to the window. The burning smell from that morning was stronger, and now, off to the east, I could see a thin line of black smoke against the pale sky. It was coming from the direction of town. I went back to the tuner. I know. But here's the thing about me. I have always defaulted to finish what you're doing before responding to something you don't understand yet. It's not that I was ignoring it. I was waiting for more information. That's how I learned to think. You don't rip out a component until you know why it's failing. You gather data first. I had about 40 minutes of peace after that. Then I heard vehicles on Haller Road moving fast, which you don't hear, not out here, not usually. I put down my soldering iron and went to the front of the barn. 2 pickups and an SUV went by doing probably 60, which on a gravel road is not smart. The pickups had stuff loaded in the bed. Bags, boxes, like people clearing out. The SUV I recognized. It was the Beaumont family from the farm about a mile east of me. All of them were in it. The window was down, and their oldest kid, a girl of about 14, was looking back down the road the way they'd come. Not looking at me, looking at whatever was behind them. Nothing came up the road after them. I went inside and turned on the emergency radio, a Midland weather alert receiver I keep charged, and let it scan. It found a signal and locked on. The tone, that specific 2-tone alert squeal, that means someone in an office somewhere has decided something is bad enough to warrant this, came through, and then a mechanical voice. The National Weather Service in Louisville has issued a civil emergency message for Hardin, Marion, LaRue, and Nelson counties. Local authorities report multiple public safety incidents. Residents are advised to stay indoors, lock doors and windows, and limit movement. This is not a weather-related emergency. Tune to local EAS stations for further information. Civil emergency message. Not a weather thing. I hadn't heard one of those before. I'd tested enough weather radios to know the codes, and a civil emergency is a different category. It's what they use for things that don't fit the other categories. I drove into town. I know. I just said I recognized something was wrong, and then I drove toward it. But the workshop sits out on Haller Road alone, and I needed to know how wrong. And I also had about 3 days of food in the place, which I'd been meaning to fix for a while. I'm not a prepper. I buy what I need when I need it. My dad was the same way. Breeden looked wrong before I even got to Main Street. There was a car in the ditch on Miller Road. Not wrecked badly, just run off the road and left. Driver's door open. The radio inside was still playing. I slowed down and looked, but there was nobody around. On Main Street, there were about 10 or 12 people standing in the parking lot of the Rexall, not doing anything, just standing. A couple of them were looking at phones. 2 were talking. One woman, I didn't know her, was sitting on the hood of her car with her arms crossed, staring at nothing. A man in a feed and seed shirt was pacing back and forth in short steps. I stopped and rolled down the window and said to the nearest person, a guy I knew a little, Danny Marsh, who cut my hair, "What's going on?" He looked at me and then looked past me, up the road. "Something's wrong at the Beaumont place," he said, "and the Colemans. And I think there's something at the school, too." He stopped. "They're saying people are sick, like attacking people. Attacking people." He looked at me then. "I'm going home," he said. "I got my family." I thought about going to the grocery store, but there was a hand-lettered sign on the door, closed. And through the glass I could see the lights were off inside, which was a first. That store had been open every day of my life, except Christmas. The owner, Gerald Pruitt, was 81 years old and came in even when he had flu. I went to the gas station on Route 84 instead. The woman behind the counter, a heavy-set woman in her 40s, whose name I'd never learned in 10 years of buying gas from her, was sitting on a stool with a shotgun across her lap. She told me take what I need and leave cash on the counter and get out of town. I loaded up on canned food, beans, soup, chili, peaches, a bag of rice that was in a display near the door, several boxes of crackers, peanut butter, bottled water, the big gallon jugs, 2 flashlights and batteries. I also took a first aid kit from the hook near the door, and I left more cash than I probably needed to. $280 in bills. I didn't ask for change. I drove back to Haller Road. And that's how I didn't see the beginning of it. I was 2 miles out of town, in my workshop, when whatever happened on Main Street happened. I heard it eventually. Distant sounds, a car alarm, once what might have been a gunshot, possibly 2. Then nothing. I sat in the workshop with the doors bolted and the windows shuttered and the emergency radio on, and I ate peanut butter straight from the jar with a spoon, because I hadn't thought to buy bread, and I listened to alerts until about 10 at night, when the alerts stopped coming, because whoever was sending them had either run out of things to say or had run out of people to say them. That first night was the longest night I've had in a long time, and I've had some long ones. I should explain the layout of this place, because it matters. The workshop is a converted barn. My father bought it in 1993 and spent about 2 years turning it into something livable and workable. The main floor is all workshop, 3 long benches, equipment racks, parts bins sorted by component type, a big wooden shelving unit along one wall where finished and unfinished jobs sit waiting. The smell in here is solder flux, machine oil, old electronics, and faintly of sawdust that never really left the wood after the original barn was cleared out. Up above is a sleeping loft, just a cot, a nightstand, a small bathroom Dad installed with a composting toilet, and a gravity-fed water tank from the roof catchment. There's a small propane heater up there, and downstairs there's a wood stove. The barn is insulated, not perfectly, but enough. The main doors are big sliding barn doors, wooden, with a steel crossbar. There are 2 regular doors, one in the back wall, one on the side. Windows are the old barn kind, not large, shuttered from inside. Dad added bars to the back ones years ago after someone broke in and stole a vintage Heathkit receiver he'd been restoring. The bars are still there. I have a truck, 2012 Chevy, nothing special, reliable enough. A generator, 5,500 watts, gas-powered, which I normally use when I need to run a large piece of equipment or test things. About 40 gallons of gas in a transfer tank in the truck bed, which I keep for reasons I'm not sure I could explain. I just always have. And I have my tools, my equipment, my parts inventory, and now the food I bought. What I didn't have, a real plan, a radio that could pick up anything useful, a working phone. The cell tower went down sometime on day 2, I think from overload more than any infrastructure damage. And the internet had been spotty from day 1, and was completely gone by day 3. I had a battery-powered AM/FM shortwave receiver, a Sony from the 90s. Good little thing. And for the first 4 days I worked through it methodically, scanning every frequency I could. AM broadcast was mostly gone, though I occasionally caught a distant signal that might have been a news station far away, too distant to be clear. Shortwave had some government tones, some military-type transmissions I couldn't decode, some international stations broadcasting in languages I don't speak. I picked up a Spanish station out of what I think was Texas, or maybe Mexico, that sounded like a normal news broadcast, which told me whatever was happening was at least somewhat localized to this region. I didn't hear any CB traffic those first days. That was strange, because CB is normally chatty in rural areas. Truckers, farmers, people with base stations at home just because they can. The silence on CB was almost as telling as anything else. On day 3, I started fortifying the barn, not because I'd seen anything directly, but because the absence of normal sounds, no traffic, no machinery, no voices carrying from other properties, was working on me in a particular way. I nailed boards over the window shutters from the inside. I consolidated all my food and water to a spot under the main bench, where I could get to it quickly. I found my old hunting rifle in the storage room, a 30-06 that I bought 8 years ago and had taken out maybe 4 times, and I cleaned it and put it where I could see it. I had 2 boxes of ammunition, about 40 rounds. I also found the CB radio. It was in the storage room at the back of the barn, on a shelf between a cardboard box of old coaxial cable fittings and a milk crate full of vintage vacuum tubes. A Cobra 148 GTL base station, which is a pretty good CB, One of the better ones from that era. My father's. It had a tag on it in his handwriting. Not for sale. The power cable was wrapped around it neatly and taped, the way Dad did things, always prepared to be put away and taken out again. I almost put it back. I had my own CB equipment, a handheld and a mobile unit that I use occasionally for testing purposes, and the Cobra was old, and I had other things to do. But I stood there in the storage room, with it in my hands, and felt the weight of it, the particular heaviness of old equipment, before they started making everything out of lightweight plastic, and I remembered him talking to people on this thing in the evenings when I was a kid, and visiting in the summers. His voice low and friendly, the crackle and chatter of other voices, the CB handle he used, which I'd forgotten until right then. Condor. He called himself Condor on the radio. He'd tried to get me to pick a handle too, when I was about 12, and I'd refused, because I was 12 and it seemed embarrassing, and I always regretted that later. I brought it into the main workshop, found a power supply that matched, hooked up the coax to the antenna he'd left mounted on the roof, a full-wave dipole, still good, still aimed right, and turned it on. The squelch opened up, and there was static, and then nothing. I scanned through the channels, mostly quiet. Channel 9, which is the emergency channel, was dead silent, which it never should be. Channel 19, which is the trucker channel, had one faint voice that was too far away to make out, just syllables. The upper channels, which are sometimes used for local talk, were all silent. I left it on 9, the emergency channel, and I went back to work. I was soldering a new capacitor into a vintage transceiver that someone had brought in weeks ago, just to have something to do with my hands, when I heard it. It was subtle at first. Just above the noise floor, I actually turned up the squelch, which cuts out weak signals, because I thought it was interference, and then I turned it back down, because something about the rhythm of it didn't sound like interference. It was a voice. A woman's voice. Calm and measured the way recorded messages are calm and measured. Not calm because she was okay. Calm because she'd prepared what she was going to say. This is an open broadcast on Channel 9. If you can hear this, shelter in place. Do not use main roads north of Route 84. Do not approach any group of people without visual confirmation they're uninfected. The following locations have been reported compromised as of this morning. And then she listed places. Towns, roads, specific intersections. Some I knew. The school in Breeden, which confirmed what I'd heard. The Route 84 junction near Calvary. The fire station in Litchfield, which was about 7 miles east. I sat there and I listened, and she went through the whole thing, and then it ended with, "This message will repeat. Stay off the roads if you can. If you cannot, move before sunrise. Good luck." And then it started over. Good luck. That's how she ended it. Not be safe, not God bless, not stay strong, just good luck. Like she'd thought about what to say and decided that was the honest version. I found out later, much later, who she was. I'll get to that. But in that moment, she was just a voice in an old CB radio, telling me things I half knew already, and I sat in my dead father's workshop in the dark, with a rifle I didn't entirely trust myself to use, and I was grateful, not for the information exactly, for the voice, just for someone talking. Days 4 and 5 I stayed close to the barn. I want to be clear about what I saw outside during this period, because people have asked me. Well, eventually they ask me, and the answer is less than you'd expect. I was on a gravel road 3/4 of a mile from the nearest neighbor. There was no foot traffic on Holler Road, not one vehicle, nothing. From the window on the east side of the barn, I could see about a 1/4 mile down the road before it curved. I watched that stretch a lot, saw nothing move except wind through the grass, and one group of crows picking at something in the road on day 4. The crows told me what I needed to know. I didn't look too long at what they were picking at. What I could hear was different. Sound carries differently when there's no background noise to absorb it, no traffic hum, no airplane overhead, no distant machinery. In that quiet, I could hear things from much farther away than usual. On the night of day 4, I heard something I can only describe as a collection of voices, not shouting, not screaming, Something more irregular than that, like people trying to speak without knowing quite what words are anymore. It came from the direction of town. It went on for maybe 40 minutes and then stopped. I sat in the loft with the rifle across my knees and didn't sleep for a long time after. On day 5, I spent the morning doing inventory. Proper inventory. Everything counted and cataloged. I am good at this. I have always been systematic. Food. Enough for approximately 2.5 to 3 weeks at moderate rationing. Water. The roof catchment tank held about 30 gallons, which was currently full from rain, 2 days before the outbreak. The hand pump for the well outside worked, and the well, as far as I could tell, was clean. Fuel. The 40 gallons in the truck tank, plus about 8 gallons in a spare can in the corner. The generator ate about half a gallon an hour under normal load, more under heavy load. So I had maybe 90 to 100 hours of generator fuel if I was careful. I'd been running the generator only at night, for 2 hours, to charge equipment. Propane. 1 full tank and 1 partial. The heater in the loft was propane. Small space, modest usage. Medical supplies. A basic first aid kit I'd had for years. A bottle of ibuprofen, some antacids. 2 old prescription antibiotics from a case of Lyme disease I'd had 3 years ago. Most of the course unused. I kept them because I forget to throw things out. Tools. Everything. I had a workshop full of hand tools, power tools, testing equipment. I had wire, cable, PVC pipe, sheet metal, wood. I had all my father's tools as well, which I'd never quite integrated into my own inventory because it still felt presumptuous. By the end of the inventory, I felt calmer. Not because the situation was good, but because I understood the shape of it, how much time I had, what the limits were. I have always found it easier to deal with a thing once I can see all of its edges. That afternoon, I went out to check the antenna on the roof. This was probably the riskiest thing I'd done so far. I went out the back door, stayed close to the barn wall, and used the old ladder Dad had left leaned against the back side. The antenna was a discone dipole on a 10-foot steel mast bolted to the roof ridge. I'd always thought of it as my father's antenna, but standing on the roof, I realized I recognized the mounting hardware. I had bought those mounts myself, 3 years ago, and brought them here, and we'd put it up together over a summer weekend. I'd forgotten that. We'd stood up there together and I'd held the mast while he tightened the clamp bolts, and he'd made a joke about how the neighbors would think we were operating a pirate radio station, and I'd laughed, and then we'd gone inside and had coffee, and probably didn't say much else, because we were alike in that way, comfortable with not talking, which is either a good trait between 2 people or a bad one, and I still haven't figured out which. The antenna was fine. The coax run looked good. One of the clamp bolts was a little loose, and I tightened it with the adjustable wrench I'd brought up. From the roof, I could see the road for about a half mile in both directions. I could see my truck in the gravel area by the side door. I could see the field behind the barn, brown and frost-dried, and the tree line beyond it. I could see the smoke from what had been Breeden. Not a heavy column anymore, more of a general haze that sat over the town and made the air brownish on that horizon. I didn't see any people. I also didn't see anyone moving in the infected way, which by day 5 I'd had one clear look at, through binoculars, early on day 3, when 2 of them had come down Miller Road. I'd watched them from the loft window. They walked, not shuffled, not ran, just walked, sort of slowly, and they changed direction when something caught their attention. They'd stopped at the ditch where the abandoned car was and spent a few minutes around it. One of them appeared to be trying to get into the car. Not intelligently, not with any method, just pushing at the window with both hands. They moved on eventually, going the way they'd come from. They looked sick. That's the only way I can put it. They moved like people with extremely high fevers move. Imprecise, sort of wrong, the motor coordination slightly off. From that distance they looked almost normal, until you watched them for more than 10 seconds, and then the wrongness became undeniable. They didn't seem to hear me. They didn't look toward the barn. Whatever was driving them, it wasn't smell, and it didn't seem to be sight at that range. I'd read enough about sound and attention Not about zombies, obviously, but about predator behavior, which I'd studied briefly in the context of wildlife research audio I once tried to repair a recorder for, to guess at what it probably was. Sound, movement triggering sound. They were responding to noise, or to the absence of it, to the nearby versus the far. So I stayed quiet, and when I went to the roof, I moved quietly. I got back inside and bolted the back door, and sat at the bench and turned on the Cobra. That was when the broadcast changed. I'd been listening to the repeating message for 2 days. Same words, same intervals, same calm voice. So when the message broke mid-cycle and was replaced by a different voice, a man this time, older sounding, with a deliberate Midwestern plainness to how he spoke, I sat forward so fast I almost knocked my coffee off the bench. Anyone on this channel monitoring, please listen carefully. We have added location data to this broadcast. I want to repeat that. We have added location data. If you are in a position to travel and need guidance, copy the following coordinates. If you are sheltering in place, record these and wait. The first coordinate set is, and he read them out. Properly read them, the way radio operators do, phonetically clear. I grabbed a marker and wrote them on the back of an old repair ticket, because it was what was in front of me. I wrote fast. There were 3 sets of coordinates. He read each one twice. Then he said, "These are waypoints, not destinations. They are safe rest points with radio access. Move only if you must. If you can broadcast, use this channel. We are listening." And then the original woman's voice came back, the recorded message cycling again. I sat back. I am not a crying person. I want to be clear about that, because what happened next was close to that, and I want you to understand the context. I am not a person who cries easily. I didn't cry when my father died. I stood at his grave in the November cold and felt a large blankness where something else probably should have been, and I went home and fixed a broken receiver someone had brought in and felt bad about the fact that the blankness was more comfortable than the grief. But sitting there in the workshop on day 5, with 3 sets of radio coordinates written on the back of a repair ticket, I felt something come loose in my chest that I hadn't known was tied tight. Someone out there knew which channel to use and how to layer a broadcast correctly and how to structure coordinate readouts the way actual radio protocol demands. That was a person who knew what they were doing, not just surviving, actively working, solving a problem with communication equipment. My father would have said, "That's your kind of person." I think I might have laughed. It came out wrong. Too sudden, and short, more like a cough. I looked at the Cobra and thought very clearly, I need to talk to whoever that is. And that's where the first problem was. Because I only had a base station. No mobile unit I could run continuously from the truck. If I left the barn, I'd lose the signal. I needed to set up mobile capability first. I needed to think about this like the technical problem it was. So I did that. I spent the afternoon building a mobile CB setup using a 25-watt mobile unit I'd had in the shop. A Uniden that someone had brought in for a ground fault 6 months ago and never picked up. I'd fixed it. It worked fine. I mounted it under the truck's dash using a piece of aluminum angle stock and 4 self-tapping screws, ran a new power lead directly to the battery with an inline fuse, and used a roof mount antenna I'd had in the parts bin. A Wilson 1000. Decent stick. Good SWR on 27 MHz if you tune it right. I spent 2 hours getting the SWR close enough to work well. Then I put the Cobra from the barn in the truck cab, on the passenger seat, running it off the inverter on the cigarette lighter. 2 CBs. The mobile for transmitting while driving. The Cobra for listening, for any signal that was coming from the barn's antenna. Overkill for most people. For me, this was thinking it through properly. I ate beans cold out of the can that evening and sat with the Cobra and the handheld and listened to the repeating broadcast and thought about the coordinates I'd written down. The first set was about 12 miles east-northeast of me, which put it somewhere near the old grain elevator complex, at the edge of a little community called Byers Fork. The second set was further, maybe 25 miles, toward the limestone ridges. The third was further still, and in a direction I didn't recognize immediately. I plotted them on a paper topo map I had in the workshop. My father had always kept paper maps. I'd never thought much about it. Now I was grateful for everything he'd kept that I hadn't understood the point of. The first coordinate, Byers Fork area, was close enough that I could drive there and back in a day if the roads were passable. If there was someone there, they'd have radio equipment. Maybe better information than I had. Maybe company, which I was not going to admit needing, but which I was starting to understand I did need, because the quiet in this barn had begun taking on a particular quality, the kind of quiet that starts to press on the inside of your ears and make you hear things that might not be there. I made a decision that night. I would leave on day 7, 2 more days to watch, observe, determine if the road was manageable. Day 7, I would drive to the first coordinate. Then, on day 6, the broadcast added something new. I was asleep in the loft, the Cobra turned down but not off, when the squelch broke open, and the sound of it woke me up, the way trained ears will wake you when something changes in the room. I sat up, head full of sleep, and heard the man's voice again. Not the recorded loop, live. This is broadcast 7. I want to add a note for anyone in the Breeden or Holler Road area. If you are Walt Hale's son, and you can hear this, your father's notes will show you where to go. Copy that. Walt Hale's son. Your father's notes will show you the way. My name, not my name, my father's name. But near enough. I was out of the loft before I was fully awake. One sock off, the other half on, and I had the transmit button on the Cobra pressed before I thought about whether that was smart. I'm here, I said. My voice came out rough with sleep. I'm on Holler Road. This is Garrett Hale. I'm Walt's son. Come back. Static. The usual noise of an open channel. Then nothing. The recorded message started again. I sat there for an hour with my hand on the mic. Nobody came back. But they'd said my name, or as close to it as made no difference. They'd said my father's name. And they'd mentioned his notes, which meant whoever was on the other end of that broadcast knew enough about Walt Hale to know he kept notes. Notes on what, I didn't know yet. I had his notebooks in a box I'd brought from his apartment after he died and had never fully opened. There were always things you meant to do. I went to find the box. The box was in the storage room, which is where things go when I'm not ready to deal with them. It was a regular cardboard moving box, the kind that liquor stores give away, and I'd written Dad's stuff on the side in black marker. Accurate but not particularly thoughtful. I looked at my own handwriting on the side of the box and felt something I can't precisely name, a sort of wincing embarrassment at my past self, like finding an old photo where your expression is wrong. I carried it into the main workshop under the fluorescent bench lights and opened it. Most of it was what I expected. A few framed photos. One of my parents together before the divorce, young and squinting into the sun at some event. My father with hair I'd never known him to have. One of me at maybe 10 or 11, holding a fish I'd caught on a trip I barely remember. A coffee mug from the local agricultural fair that he'd used until the handle broke and then had kept anyway. His wallet, which the hospital had given me in a paper bag. His watch, a 1970s Seiko, still running. I'd wound it once a month since he died and I don't know why. His reading glasses, 2 pairs, 1 case cracked. 2 repair notebooks, standard composition books, black and white, filled front to back with his cramped technical handwriting, circuits, component values, notes on repairs going back years. I'd looked through those briefly before and understood most of it. The man was good at what he did. These were the records of someone who'd kept doing careful work for 40 years and took it seriously every time. And then a third notebook, different from the others, smaller, a spiral-bound pocket notebook, the kind that goes in a shirt pocket. The cover was water-stained and the pages had the thick, slightly wavy quality of paper that's gotten wet and dried out. The handwriting inside was still his, but more hurried, less formal. And the content was nothing like the repair logs. It was a map. Well, it started as notes, but there was a hand-drawn map on the second page. The county, hand-drawn in blue pen, the roads approximate but recognizable. He'd marked 10 points on the map with numbered circles. Under each number, in the margins and on subsequent pages, he'd written descriptions. Point 1, Miller Tower. Shortwave repeater, 40-meter band. Access by Millbrook Road, third gate on left. Key under flat rock, north side of gate post. Last serviced March 2019. Point 2. Byers Fork Grain Complex. CB repeater, installed in the elevator control room east tower. Solar charged battery bank, should hold charge indefinitely. Also contains emergency supplies cache, first aid, water, food. Access through south side grain bin door, padlocked. Code 1134. Point 3. I stopped reading and sat very still. The Byers Fork Grain Complex. That was the first coordinate. He'd put a repeater there. He'd put a supply cache there. He'd written the access code in his pocket notebook. He knew it would still be running, potentially indefinitely. Solar charged. I went through all 10 points. Some were relay towers I recognized. A few were locations I'd driven past without knowing what they were. And the last two, points 9 and 10, were marked differently, not with the usual entry format. Instead, he'd written primary shelter, grid 9, and a separate set of handwritten coordinates. And below that, secondary, grid 10, avoid if grid 9 is compromised. And under grid 9's coordinates, access code is Eleanor's birthday. Garrett knows the date. I had to read it twice. My mother's name was Eleanor Hale. Eleanor Marsh now. I supposed. She'd remarried, maybe 20 years ago, to a man in Ohio I'd never met. We spoke on the phone at Christmas, and sometimes not even that. She'd sent a card when my father died, and I'd called to acknowledge it, and we'd been formally kind to each other for about 4 minutes. Her birthday was July 14th. I'd always known it. Kids remember their parents' birthdays even when everything else falls apart. My father, who had been divorced from my mother for 29 years, had used her birthday as the code for his emergency shelter, and he'd known I knew it. He'd specifically counted on that. I sat in the workshop with that pocket notebook in my hands and felt very much like there was something I'd missed, a whole side of a conversation that had been happening without me, between my father and the idea of me, and I'd never known to listen for it. I went to bed. I did not sleep well. Day 7. I got up early. I'd decided the night before. I was going. Let me tell you about that morning, because mornings have their own character, and this one was specific. It was cold. Not freeze-your-breath cold, but the kind of cold that settles in a barn because barns breathe. They're never quite airtight, and I could feel it in the floor through my socks. The light coming through the cracks in the window shutters was that particular thin gray blue of early morning before the sun gets any warmth behind it. I had instant coffee because it was what I had. I heated water on the propane camp stove, not the wood stove, because the wood stove would mean smoke from the chimney, which would mean a visible signal of occupancy. I'd been thinking about that for days. I made the coffee in a tin cup and drank it standing at the bench, looking at my inventory of what I was taking. Food for 4 days minimum. The rifle and both boxes of ammunition. The Cobra radio in a padded case. The mobile unit in the truck. A box of assorted tools. Small stuff. The stuff you can't always get by without. The topo map with Dad's coordinates marked. His pocket notebook. The Sony shortwave receiver. Charging cables. A power inverter. A small deep cycle battery I'd charged off the generator. Blankets. Water jugs. I also took the old repair kit that sat on the corner of Dad's bench. Not mine. His. The one with his name on a piece of tape on the side of the box. I took it because it had a specific set of coaxial fittings and crimp tools that I thought might be useful, and also because I wanted to have something of his with me that he'd actually used regularly. That's the honest reason. The truck started on the second try. The morning was quiet in the way these mornings had been quiet for a week. Not peaceful, just absent. The quiet that comes from subtraction rather than addition. I pulled out of the barn, stopped to close and padlock the barn door, not because I expected to be back, but because leaving it open felt wrong, and turned onto Holler Road heading east. The road was empty. Of course it was. But the specific way it was empty was different from regular empty, and the difference is hard to explain unless you've felt it. Regular empty is neutral. This was empty like a room that someone just left, like the absence was fresh. I drove slowly, which you have to on gravel anyway, and I watched the sides of the road. Fields, fence lines, a woodlot, a farmhouse set back a long way. The Hartley place, I thought, though I only knew them by name. No signs of life or movement. Their mailbox was open at the end of the drive. Flag up, mail still in it. At the end of Haller Road, I turned left onto Miller Road, which was paved, 2-lane country road. Picked up speed a little, turned the mobile CB to channel 9. Static. And then, faint but clear. Morning check on frequency. This is Byers Fork Group. Anyone copying, please respond. I picked up the handset. Byers Fork Group. This is Garrett Hale, Haller Road area. I'm mobile, about 8 miles west of you. Responding to the Channel 9 broadcast. I'm inbound to your location. A pause. Then, Garrett Hale. Copy that. You found the notebook. It was a man's voice, not the same as the broadcast voice I'd heard before. Older, with a slight rasp. The kind of voice that sounds like it's smoked at some point, but not recently. Careful, deliberate, like he was choosing each word separately. I found it, I said. Another pause. Your father was a good man. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said, what's the road situation between Miller Road and your location? A longer pause. Then, Conrad here. I'll brief you when you arrive. Route through Calvary Crossroads is not advised. Come up the east side of Route 108. Do you know the livestock auction barn on 108? I did. I'd been there maybe twice in my life. Big, low building with a rusted Quonset hut roof. I know it. Turn into that lot, drive around to the back. There's a gap in the fence. We'll see you from the elevator. Copy. ETA maybe 30-40 minutes. Take your time, he said. Don't rush. He signed off. The static came back. I drove. The drive to Byers Fork. I want to tell you about this, because the roads on the way there had their own story, and stories are in the details of things, not the summary. About 4 miles out, where Miller Road crosses under the power lines that run east-west across the county, I passed a gas station. Haskell's, a little independent, 2 pumps under a canopy, a small store, the kind of place that sells lottery tickets and bait, and not much else. Both pumps were running. I saw this from maybe 100 yards away. The digital displays on both pump panels were lit up, showing the per-gallon price in green LED numbers the same as any normal day. I almost drove past, then stopped. I sat there for a moment, both pumps running, nobody at them. The canopy lights were on too, those bright white fluorescent strips. And from inside the store, through the plate glass window, I could see the overhead lights were on, and I could see a sign taped to the inside of the glass. Open. The store looked empty. I could see most of the interior from the road. No movement. The door was ajar, hanging open about 4 inches. From inside I could hear music. Country radio. Played on tinny speakers. And it kept playing the same song. Or at least the same verse of the same song. Which meant it was actually a CD. Or something on loop, rather than the radio. I sat there in the truck for probably 2 full minutes. Engine idling. Watching. Nothing moved. The song looped again. I recognized it. A Dwight Yoakam song I'd heard 100 times in this region. Just part of the sonic wallpaper of rural Kentucky. I almost drove on. But the pumps were running. And I had 48 gallons of fuel in the transfer tank. Which was good. But the truck itself was just over half. And there was no telling how far I was going to have to go from Byers Fork. I pulled slowly into the lot. Stopped the truck so that the cab faced the road, so I could leave fast if I needed to. Rolled the window down and listened. The music from inside. Wind in the canopy framing. Nothing else. I got out. I had the rifle in the cab, but I brought the knife instead. A solid fixed-blade Mora I kept behind the seat. Because a rifle is loud, and I was thinking about sound. I went to the nearest pump. Regular unleaded, $3.59 a gallon. I picked up the nozzle, opened my fuel door, started pumping. While it pumped, I watched the lot, the road, the sides of the building. Nothing. I topped off the tank, slow, because the pump metered at the usual rate. And when it clicked off, I replaced the nozzle and stood there for a moment. Then I went to the store door, pushed it open all the way. It made the usual ding of a door chime. The music was louder inside. The Dwight Yoakam song, which was about a California girl and the singer being lonely, which struck me as inappropriate in a way I didn't examine too hard. The store was as it had always looked. Shelves still mostly stocked. The bait cooler in the back wall was still running, humming. The coffee machine on the counter was on, and the coffee inside was so thick and dark from sitting that it looked like engine oil. Behind the counter, no one. I went around behind the counter and found the register. Open, cash still in it. I found the CD player, the cheap countertop kind, and saw that it was set to repeat. I stopped the song. The silence was immediate and strange. I worked fast. I loaded things into a cardboard box I found behind the counter. Canned food, crackers, bags of nuts, beef jerky, 2 bottles of water, a tube of antiseptic cream, a box of bandages. I took a roll of duct tape, 3 packs of AA batteries, a cheap headlamp, a road atlas, the current year. I left money on the counter, $120. I don't know why. Nobody was going to collect it, but it seemed right to leave it. I was back in the truck in 8 minutes. I drove away and the music didn't start again behind me because I'd stopped the CD. And I spent the next few miles thinking about the person who'd set everything up that morning and then just not come back. The pumps on, the lights on, the music running on a loop, a store waiting to open for customers who never came. The road through Calvary Crossroads was the one Conrad had told me to avoid. I stayed on Route 108 instead. The road bent north and then east in a slow curve, and as it did, I passed through a stretch of woods and then out again into more open farmland, and that's where I saw the first infected. 3 of them, walking in the field to my left, about 200 yards out. They were moving slowly, not in any particular direction that I could determine. One was wearing a heavy coat. One was in what looked like pajamas. The third had no shoes on, which I can't stop thinking about even now. The image of someone walking across a frosty November field with bare feet. They didn't react to the truck. I was doing maybe 40, which on this road was reasonable. Maybe the distance was enough. Maybe the sound didn't carry the way it would in still air. I kept going. A mile later, I passed a farmhouse set close to the road with a big red barn behind it. Normal enough. Except someone had painted something on the barn roof in white letters, large enough to read from the road, "Do not land here." Not help or SOS or the usual signal to aircraft. Not anything that made immediate sense. "Do not land here," in large white letters on a barn roof. I slowed down and looked at the house. No sign of people. I thought about it while I drove. My best guess, and I still think this is right, is that someone was trying to signal rescue helicopters and got confused. They'd wanted to write "land here" and wrote the wrong thing, or they'd started to write it and changed their mind and only got the "not" in wrong order, or they'd tried to correct a mistake and made it worse. Any of those felt plausible. But I've also thought about the other possibility, which is that the message means exactly what it says, and they were warning people away from that farm for reasons they understood, and I didn't, and that somebody else who might have tried to land there was being protected by the warning. I don't know. I never stopped. About a mile before the livestock auction barn, I passed an intersection, stop sign on my right, and in the middle of the intersection, stopped dead, with no visible damage, was a minivan, the kind with sliding doors and a peeling stick figure family on the back windshield. And on top of the van, on the actual roof of it, standing on it, balanced, was a man. He was standing straight, arms at his sides, staring up, not at anything I could see, just at the sky, which was overcast and flat white-gray and had nothing in it. He was breathing. I could see his chest moving. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans and work boots, and he looked like any man in this county looks in November. He looked normal, except for being on top of a van in the middle of an intersection staring at the sky. I stopped the truck. I rolled down my window. He didn't look at me. "Hey," I said, not loud, quiet. "You okay?" He didn't turn his head. I sat there for a moment. Are you hurt? Nothing. Then, very slowly, he turned his head toward me. His eyes found me. He looked at me for a full 3 seconds, which is longer than it sounds when you're waiting. The birds know, he said. His voice was completely normal. Not frightened, not crazy sounding, just matter of fact. Like he was answering a question I'd actually asked. What do the birds know? I said. He looked back at the sky. Everything. They already left. I sat there for another moment. He was clearly not infected. Infected people don't stand on vans and speak in complete sentences. He was something else. Not my problem or my place to judge what. I said, there's a group at the Byers Fork grain elevator if you need somewhere to be. They're on Channel 9. He didn't respond. Kept looking at the sky. I drove on. I thought about him for a long time afterward. I still think about him. The man on the van. The birds know. Maybe he'd seen something. Maybe he'd watched the birds leave days before any of this started and understood something the rest of us missed, and the knowledge of it had done something specific to him. Or maybe he'd just broken, quietly and completely, in his own particular way, and standing on a van staring at the sky was where he'd ended up. I'd like to think the birds told him something worth knowing. The grain elevator complex at Byers Fork was 4 big cylindrical concrete towers connected at the top by a conveyor housing, plus a long, low equipment shed and an old control room building. The whole thing hadn't been in active operation for at least 15 years. The grain industry had consolidated, and the smaller local elevators got left behind. The towers were still structurally sound, just quiet. I pulled around behind the livestock auction barn, found the gap in the chain-link fence where it had been bent open, eased the truck through, and drove the 1/4 mile of dirt track to the elevator complex's south side. A man came out of the equipment shed door when I parked. He was tall, 60s, white hair cut short, wearing a canvas coat over a plaid shirt. He moved with the particular economy of someone who'd spent a long time not wasting motion. He watched me get out of the truck without expression. "Garrett Hale," he said. "Conrad," I said. He had the voice, the one from the radio. He put out his hand, and I shook it. His grip was what you'd expect from someone who'd been doing physical work his whole life. "Your father ever mentioned me?" He said. "No," I said. He nodded, like that was the answer he'd expected. "He mentioned you. Come inside. The others will want to hear what the roads look like." There were 6 of them in the equipment shed. The shed was big enough, with a concrete floor and high corrugated walls, and they'd set up something like a living space in the center of it, using pallets and canvas tarps and an old folding table. A propane heater going, enough light from a couple of battery lanterns. Donna introduced herself first. She was 52, a middle school science teacher from Breeden. Not my Breeden, a different person from a town I recognized. She had reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me immediately of the kind of teacher who doesn't need to raise her voice, because she never loses her authority to begin with. Phil was next, 33, mechanic, the restless energy type who keeps a cigarette behind his ear and reaches for it about every 15 minutes regardless of whether he lights it. He looked like he hadn't slept well in a week, which was probably accurate. Then Conrad introduced me to Amber, who was 24, and sitting apart from the others with a notebook open on her knee, writing something in it. She looked up when Conrad said her name and gave a brief nod and went back to writing. She was a biology student home from college for a family visit when everything started. Her family hadn't made it, or hadn't made it to her. She didn't say which, and nobody asked. Teddy was 45, a long-haul trucker with a broken arm, the right one, in a makeshift splint that Donna had put together from barrel-stave wood and ace bandages. His arm had been broken in a car accident on day 2 of the outbreak. He'd swerved to avoid something on the road and gone into a ditch. The truck was a total loss. He was managing better than he probably should have been with one good arm, the way people sometimes discover they can manage. And then there was Owen. Owen was 16. He was sitting on an overturned crate in the corner of the shed, knees up, arms around his knees, looking at nothing in particular. He had light brown hair and was wearing a school sweatshirt with a team logo on it. He'd been with Phil when all this started. Phil was his uncle, had him for a visit. He hasn't talked since day 3, Conrad said, quietly, when I was standing close enough to hear that, and no one else was nearby. He's not sick. He eats. He sleeps. He just stopped. I looked at Owen. He didn't look at me. Okay, I said. He'll be okay, Conrad said, in the way you say something when you don't actually know. They fed me. Canned soup, crackers, coffee from a camp pot, and Conrad sat across from me at the folding table and told me things. He'd been a Signal Corps technician in the Army, he said, for 22 years before retirement. Stationed at various bases, worked with communications infrastructure, eventually specialized in field communications during operations. After retiring, he'd moved back to this county, where he'd grown up, and spent his time on amateur radio as a hobby that was also more than a hobby. He'd been a licensed ham operator since his 20s. He'd known my father for about 12 years. Walt was part of a civil defense communication network, he said. Amateur radio operators, mostly, started in the 60s and 70s with civil defense concerns. The idea was that if conventional communication failed, whether from weather, disaster, enemy action, whatever it was at the time, there'd be a distributed network of amateur radio stations that could carry emergency traffic. Your father was one of the regional coordinators. He never told me that, I said. Conrad looked at me. No, I don't suppose he thought he needed to. It was an old program. Most people had forgotten about it by the 2000s. The formal structure was dissolved years ago. But Walt kept his piece of it running. The repeaters, the shelter, the communication points. He kept them maintained and updated because, he paused, choosing words, because he thought someone should, because the infrastructure was there, and it worked, and it seemed wasteful to let it go. I thought about that. My father, quietly maintaining a network of emergency radio relays for 20 or 30 years, because someone had to, and he was the person who'd taken the responsibility, and that was sufficient reason. Never telling his son about it. Not because it was secret, I thought. More because it wasn't conversation, it was work. Like fixing receivers. You don't announce it. The broadcast, I said. Who set it up? Who's sending it? Conrad was quiet for a moment. There is a woman in the shelter, he said. Nora Bellum. She's 71 years old, and she was the other person who knew the network as well as Walt. She was they were close friends. They'd worked on this for 30 years together. When the outbreak started, she went to the shelter. She took the backup equipment Walt had stored there, and she's been broadcasting from inside. 30 years, I said. I never heard her name. Walt wasn't much for talking about personal things, Conrad said. No, he wasn't. I could confirm that. She's been trying to reach you specifically, Conrad said. She added your name to the broadcast herself. She knew if Walt was gone and his equipment was still at the barn, you'd be the one to find it. How is she? Alive. Stable. She said so in her last transmission 3 days ago. He paused. The shelter is at the 3rd coordinate on the map, the one your father's notes call Grid 9. I know where it is, I said. I found the notebook. Conrad looked at me steadily. There's more, he said. I waited. Someone else has been listening to the broadcast. He told me about them over the next hour. Not all at once. Phil and Donna had questions, and the 6 of them had been talking about this for days, and there was a particular dynamic I was stepping into, like joining a conversation that's been going on without you. But Conrad was the one who gave me the clearest picture. The group called themselves, according to a brief transmission Conrad had picked up on day 5, the Continuity Coordination Group. They had military-grade vehicles. Conrad had seen 2 dark SUVs and what appeared to be a decommissioned military LMTV truck on Route 108 2 days ago, moving east. They were monitoring radio traffic across the region. How they'd gotten hold of military vehicles, nobody knew. Maybe they'd been in the right position when things fell apart. Maybe they had credentials. Whatever it was, they were organized and they were equipped. They haven't approached us directly, Donna said, but Conrad heard their radio operator. They were logging frequencies, specifically our frequency. What do they want? I said. Resources, Phil said, his jaw tight. He reached up and touched the cigarette behind his ear. Didn't take it down. That's what they told the Wilson family up on 108 before they stripped their farm. They want resources, and they want information about infrastructure, safe locations, power sources. And if people don't cooperate? Phil looked at me in a way that answered that. I'd have liked to sit and think about this for a while. I am a person who likes to understand a problem fully before acting, but the situation had its own pace, and it was faster than I'd have preferred. That night of day 7, my first night at Byers Fork, I set up the Cobra base station in the elevator control room. The control room was the best protected space in the complex, a concrete block building with a heavy door and 2 small windows. Conrad's solar-charged battery bank was in there, a proper setup, 4 100-amp-hour deep cycles with a decent charge controller, which had been running continuously off a 200-watt solar array on the roof since before any of this. The batteries were at 87%, which was better than I'd expected. I connected the Cobra to the battery bank through the inverter, connected the coax that Conrad had run to a vertical antenna on the roof. Then I sat with headphones and methodically scanned every CB channel, both lower and upper. On channel 30, upper band, which is technically outside the standard CB allocation, but lots of older radios can reach it, I found them. The continuity group, or their radio operator, at least. He was talking to someone in a vehicle, using a somewhat garbled protocol that was half CB slang and half actual military radio procedure, which comes out as a strange hybrid if you don't have proper discipline. I listened for 20 minutes. They were logging position information. They'd tracked the signal from our antenna. They had a rough bearing on us. I was almost sure of it. They didn't know exactly where, but they were narrowing. I turned the Cobra off. I found Conrad and told him. He didn't look surprised. How long? If they're moving methodically, maybe 2 days. If they push toward the signal tonight, they might be closer already. Conrad thought, we need to move. To the shelter, I said. Yes, that's 14 miles from here, through Calvary Crossroads, which you said was compromised. There's a county road that bypasses it, adds 3 or 4 miles but avoids the main town. Your father had it marked in the notebook as an alternate route. I thought about the 2 vehicles we had, my truck and a flatbed that Phil had been keeping fueled, which would carry most of the group, about Teddy's broken arm, about Owen, who hadn't spoken in 4 days, about the fact that moving 14 miles in the dark with the infected and the continuity group both potentially active was a particular kind of risk, and about Nora, who was 71 and alone in a shelter and had been for 3 weeks. Tomorrow morning, I said, as early as we can move. Pack tonight. Conrad nodded. The repeater in the control room. I'll set it to retransmit the original broadcast on a timer and then leave it running. They'll still be homing in on it for a while after we leave. It'll buy us time. I thought about it. I can set the transmit power low so the signal doesn't carry far. Confuse the bearing. He looked at me in the way my father sometimes had, when I'd figured out something he'd already known, but wanted me to find myself. It was a particular look. I recognized it even on a stranger's face. Your father said you were good at this, Conrad said. He said that? Not in so many words. He stood up, old joints making the small sounds old joints make. He said you had a good ear for signals. He meant it as a compliment. I didn't say anything to that. I went back to the control room and started setting up the timer. That night, while the others slept, I went through the pocket notebook again. 3rd time reading it, this time with specific questions in mind. The alternate route to Grid 9 was marked. Conrad was right. It added about 4 miles, going north on a county road I'd been on a few times, then east on a gravel track I didn't know well, then south through a stretch of state forest land to where the limestone ridge began. The shelter itself was described as cave system, modified, secondary entrance used, primary sealed since 1986. Look for the equipment shed on the ridge access road. The shed will be locked. Code is same as shelter access. And then a note that I read 3 times before I understood it. The radio system inside operates on a separate power circuit from the shelter. If the main power fails, the radio can still run. The antenna array is on the ridge above, hardened mounting. Coax runs inside through conduit in the rock. There is a high-power amplifier unit in the radio room. I bought it in 1994. Never needed it, but it's there. A high-power amplifier on a CB setup would dramatically increase broadcast range. On a normal CB, max legal power is 4 watts on AM. With an amplifier, the kind of amplifier my father might have bought in 1994, which would have been an old linear amp, probably in the 100 to 300 watt range, you could cover the entire county and then some. Maybe multiple counties, depending on terrain and conditions. He'd put it there for a reason. He'd never used it. He'd kept it ready. I sat with that for a long time. I also sat with the entry about my mother's birthday. I thought about my father spending 30-some years knowing Eleanor's birthday and keeping it close enough that he used it as a code. Not as a romantic thing, probably, but as a fact he held on to because it was a fact that connected to his son, and his son was worth keeping things for. I went to sleep in the control room, on the concrete floor, on a piece of foam padding Phil had found in the equipment shed, and I slept better than I had in 8 days. Not well, but better. Early the next morning. Before anyone was up, before I even made coffee, I sat in the truck with the mobile unit on and scanned. I found the continuity group immediately. They were active early, which told me they were disciplined about their schedule. They were on the same channel 30. I listened for about 12 minutes. They had a better bearing on the Byers Fork location than I'd hoped. They were close to a triangulated fix, and the man on the radio, their operator, said something that made me set down the handset and think hard. He said, "Tell Rawls that the signal has a secondary transmission in it. DTMF below audible. We haven't decoded it yet, but it's there. This isn't just a standard distress broadcast. Someone knew about the embedded data. Someone on their team had equipment good enough to detect the subaudible DTMF tones, which meant they were looking for what those tones contained, and what they contained. The routing information for the repeater network, the shelter coordinates, the access data, was everything. I went to get Conrad. We were loaded and moving by 6:30. It was still dark enough to be uncomfortable, which I decided was actually good. Less visual detection range, and the infected seemed to orient primarily to sound, which meant slow and quiet was our best strategy. My truck in front, Phil's flatbed behind. Phil drove with his cigarette finally lit, hanging out his cracked window. Donna was in the cab with him. Amber and Conrad were in the truck bed, sitting on the gear, which wasn't comfortable, but there was no room in the cabs. Teddy was in my passenger seat because of his arm. And Owen was in the truck bed with the others, knees pulled up the same way I'd first seen him. I went first because I knew the route better, having studied the topo map that morning, and because my truck was smaller and more maneuverable. The first 3 miles were fine. We moved at about 15 miles an hour on gravel, and 25 on the paved stretch, which was slow but manageable. The morning was cold and still, and the only thing I could hear besides the engine was the crunch of gravel and the occasional squeak of my truck's rear suspension. Then we hit the county road going north, and things got complicated. About a mile up, a pickup truck was parked sideways across both lanes. Not crashed, deliberately positioned. The doors were open, no one in or around it. I stopped, got out, listened. Nothing moving. I walked up to the blocking truck and looked inside. Keys were in it, empty coffee cup in the cup holder, a pair of women's glasses on the dash, a child's drawing, the marker on paper kind, clipped to the visor with a binder clip. I put the truck in neutral, put my weight behind it, and pushed it to the shoulder. It moved easier than I expected. Phil helped, his one-handed grip on the frame awkward but useful. We moved on. The gravel track east was where it got worse. The track was rutted, and in one place almost washed out, a section where a culvert had let go, and the water had cut a 4-foot gully across the road. My truck made it through the edge of the washout with some careful steering and a lot of wheel spin. Phil's flatbed, heavier, got stuck for about 8 minutes while he and I used a piece of lumber from the bed to lever the back wheels out of the rut. During those 8 minutes, everyone was quiet, in a specific way. The way you get quiet when you know that noise is the primary risk. On the far side of the washout, with both vehicles through, I stopped to check the radio and heard something I wasn't expecting. A new voice on Channel 9. Not the recorded loop, not Conrad's measured tone. A different voice entirely. A man, younger, speaking fast. Anyone who can hear this, we are at the Route 17 bridge, east side. We have wounded, 4 adults and 2 children. We can't move. Someone please copy this. I picked up the handset. I looked at Conrad, who had leaned through the sliding rear window into the cab. He gave me a small nod. Route 17 bridge. This is Garrett Hale. I copy you. How many wounded and what's your situation? I kept it short, the way you do on radio when you're not sure who else is listening. A pause. Then, oh God. Okay. We have 1 person with a leg injury. Can't walk. 1 older woman who hasn't been well for 2 days. We don't know if it's the infection or something else. 4 others who are okay. 2 kids, 8 and 12. We've been under the bridge for, I think, 3 days. The south access is blocked. I mean, there are things on the south side. Infected, I said. Yes, a lot of them. They came with the sound of our vehicle and He stopped, steadied himself. They won't leave. I looked at the topo map on my knee. Route 17 bridge. It was north of us. Maybe 2 miles, slightly off our intended track. Going there would add time. Time that the continuity group was using to narrow in on the elevator repeater, and eventually on us. But there were 2 kids. Conrad read my expression, or my hesitation, or whatever it was. Detour, he said. 2 miles, I said. Maybe 3, lost. I know. He looked at me steadily. Your call. My call. I looked at the radio. Route 17 bridge. Keep off this channel. Go to channel 6 and monitor. We'll come to you. A long pause. Then, copy. Thank you. Channel 6. I changed frequency. Told them to stay put, stay quiet, not to call out on 9 again. I recalculated the route on the topo. Coming at the bridge from the north would avoid whatever was clustered on the south side. There was a farm track on the county map, not perfectly readable, maybe a decade old, might not exist anymore, that approached from the north. We went north. The bridge situation. I want to tell you what we found there because it was the thing that told me what we were dealing with, more clearly than anything I'd seen from a window or heard from a distance. The Route 17 bridge is a concrete span over a creek. Nothing special. The creek may be 30 feet across and not deep. The group of survivors was under it on the north bank, in the space between the water and the bridge's north abutment. 6 of them in that narrow, damp space, under a concrete ceiling, the creek running cold and shallow in front of them. We pulled up on the north access road as quietly as we could, killed the engines, walked the last quarter mile. Phil stayed with the trucks. On the south side of the bridge, visible through the creek, I could see 8 or 9 of the infected. They were moving along the south bank, irregular, some of them almost stationary, none of them looking our way. The sound of the creek was probably masking us. I took that in, filed it. The 6 survivors looked like what 3 days under a bridge looks like. The youngest of them, a girl of 8, was wrapped in a sleeping bag that someone had gotten into a stuff sack and then taken out again, and she was asleep against the oldest woman's side. The older woman, 60-something, gray-faced, breathing in a way I didn't like, had a blanket around her shoulders, and was conscious, but barely. The man who'd been on the radio was 30-ish, maybe, I'm bad at ages, with a beard that had started 3 days ago, and eyes that had too much of the whites showing, the way eyes look when someone has been maintaining vigilance beyond their capacity. He introduced himself as Lyle. He gripped my hand hard when he shook it. The person with the leg injury was a woman in her 40s, Peggy, who'd twisted her ankle badly enough that she couldn't put weight on it. Not broken, she thought, just wrong. The other 2 were teenage boys, brothers, who looked exactly alike and said nothing. "We heard the broadcast," Lyle said, low and fast. 4 days ago. We wrote down the coordinates, but we couldn't reach the first one, the elevator complex, because Route 108 was blocked. We tried to go around and ended up here. And then they followed us. They follow sound, I said. You make noise, they come. You stop, they stay. You can't outrun them unless you're willing to go loud. We were in a sedan, Lyle said. When we got stuck the first time, we went on foot, and we were loud because... He looked at the older woman. Joan had an episode. She was confused and frightened, and He stopped. They came fast. I looked at Joan. I thought about the fact that she'd been not well for 2 days. I thought about the infection and how it moved through people. Has she been bitten? I said. Lyle looked at me. I'm not asking to be harsh, I said. I'm asking because it determines what we do next. He shook his head. No, she has heart problems. She's been on medication. She ran out 4 days ago. I don't think it's the infection. I think it's her heart. I looked at Donna, who'd come up behind me. She gave a small nod that said she'd handle it. Getting them out was a logistics problem. The infected on the south bank were reacting to sound. Any loud movement would bring them around to the north side fast, and the bridge gave them a crossing point. So we needed to move everyone quietly and fast. The small girl was easy. Amber carried her. Joan was the problem. Conrad and I made a carry using our interlocked arms. The old chair carry that's awkward but works. We moved in 2 groups. First group with the kids and Amber. Back up the north access road to the trucks. Quiet, fast. Then back for Joan and Lyle and Peggy. We were almost to the trucks with the second group, when one of the teenage brothers, I found out his name later, it was Derek, which I thought was an unfortunate coincidence given who else we were going to encounter, stepped on something that snapped, a branch or a stick, something, and the sound cracked out clearly in the still air. 30 seconds of nothing, then a splash from the south side of the creek. Move, I said, quietly, but with enough in my voice that everyone understood. We moved, Donna and Lyle supporting Joan between them, Conrad helping Peggy hop on 1 foot, fast. I went behind and watched. 2 of them crossed the creek. They came through the shallow water without slowing, without hesitating, just walking through it the way they'd walk through anything. No attempt to avoid it. Not smart enough to plan anything. Just following the sound, persistent as water finding a crack. We made it to the trucks. Everybody in. Phil already had both engines running. Good man. He'd heard it coming before I'd signaled. We pulled out before the infected reached the north access road. I heard them behind us as we left. Not gaining on us. Not trying to. Just still moving, because that's what they do, walking toward where the sound was. Now, we were 10 people in 2 vehicles. Joan was in the flatbed cab with Phil, Donna next to her, Donna's hand on her wrist monitoring her pulse. Lyle was in the truck bed. Peggy was in the truck bed, leg propped. Owen had shifted to make room, doing it without being asked, which was the first thing I'd seen him do voluntarily. The kids and the teenage brothers were crammed in wherever there was space. The route to the shelter. We were 4 miles out when I heard the continuity group. Not on their frequency, on ours, on Channel 9. A new voice, not their radio operator. Calmer than that, with a deliberate quality that felt practiced, like someone who'd spent time thinking about how to come across. Channel 9, this is Derek Rawls with the Continuity Coordination Group. I'm looking to speak to whoever's been managing the broadcast from the Byers Fork area. We know you've moved. We're not trying to prevent that. We'd like to talk. I didn't pick up the handset. He gave it 30 seconds. Then, we have resources that can help your group. Medical supplies, fuel, firearms. We've been consolidating these resources across the county because we think the best chance for everyone is organized, centralized. We don't want conflict. We want to talk. I looked at the radio. I thought about what Conrad had told me, about the Wilson farm being stripped, about organized and centralized meaning something specific when the people doing the organizing were the ones with the vehicles and the weapons. I pressed transmit. Mr. Rawls, this is Garrett Hale. I hear you. I'm not in a position to meet right now. I'll reach back out when I am. A pause. Then, Garrett Hale. Okay. Walt Hale's son. Another pause. I know about the shelter, Mr. Hale. I know about the Civil Defense Network. I want you to understand that we can make use of those resources more effectively than a small group can. We're not adversaries. How did he know about the shelter? How did he know my father's name? I put the truck in gear. Keep moving. I appreciate that, I said into the handset. I'll be in touch, Mr. Rawls. He gave me his frequency. I wrote it down and drove. He knows, Conrad said through the rear window. He knows something, I said. Not everything, he said. The shelter, singular. He doesn't know which one, and he doesn't have the coordinates or the access code. But his operator is working on the DTMF data. Yes, I thought about this. How long to decode it, if you have the right equipment? Conrad was quiet for a moment, hours maybe, if they have anything sophisticated. Then we're racing a clock, I said. Conrad said, we have been for days. The state forest section was the hardest part of the drive. The gravel track through the forest was one lane, ungraded, with low branches on both sides. We went through it at 10 miles an hour with headlights off, because we were close enough to the ridge that I wanted to see what we were driving toward before we announced ourselves. Night vision in daylight was fine, but the forest was dim under the trees, and driving by the diffuse light that filtered through was slow and careful. And then we came out of the tree line, and there it was, the ridge, limestone, a long, steep face of gray-white rock, weathered, with cedar trees growing from the cracks. In the morning light, it looked like something that had been here long before any of us, and would be here long after. The equipment shed was at the base of the ridge, at the end of the track. A metal building, small, painted the same gray-green as the forest, the kind of building you could drive past and not think anything of. I pulled up and stopped, got out. The others stayed in the vehicles for the moment. The padlock on the shed door was a combination lock. I looked at my father's notebook, same as shelter access. The shelter code was my mother's birthday, July 14th, 0714. The lock opened. Inside the shed was equipment, old stuff, well maintained, a junction box, conduit running up the wall and disappearing into the rock, cable storage, and a steel door set into the limestone with an electronic keypad beside it. The keypad was powered. A small indicator light was green. I entered 0714. The door unlocked. A heavy, solid sound. Multiple bolts retracting. The door swung out, hinged outward, smart, harder to breach from inside. Beyond it was a corridor, concrete and limestone. A single LED strip light running along the ceiling, running on battery power. Not very bright, but enough. Cool air coming from within. The smell of old concrete, and the very faint, specific smell of electronic equipment running in an enclosed space. A smell I'd know anywhere. I went in first. The corridor was about 30 feet long. At the end, it opened into a main room. Big enough, maybe 40 by 30 feet. The ceiling was the limestone itself, reinforced at intervals with concrete pillars. Folding cots along one wall, 6 of them. Shelving units stacked with supplies. The label maker labels on the shelves were from years ago, but the supplies themselves were supplemented with newer additions. More recent cans and packages mixed in with the dated ones. And in the center of the room, at a folding table, surrounded by radio equipment, a base station, a receiver, a rack mount amplifier, cables running up through conduit in the ceiling, sat a woman. She was 71 years old, white hair, cut straight across at chin length, wearing a heavy sweater and fingerless gloves, because the shelter was cool enough to need them. She had headphones around her neck and a mug of something hot in both hands. She looked like she'd been underground for 3 weeks, because she had been underground for 3 weeks, and she'd organized that time carefully. She had notes pinned to the wall behind her. She had books on the shelf behind her. She had a small plant, a succulent in a terracotta pot, on the corner of the radio table, which I found remarkable. She'd brought a plant. She looked at me when I came in. Her eyes were dark and sharp and a little underslept. "You look like your father," she said, around the eyes. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "I'm Garrett." "I know you are." She set down the mug. "I've been waiting 3 weeks for you. Come in and close the door. Then go get whoever else you brought." Her name was Nora Bellum. She'd retired 12 years ago from a career as an electrical engineer. She'd met my father in 1989 at an amateur radio club meeting, and they'd been close friends for the rest of his life. Close in the way that two people who share a specific interest and a specific temperament can be close without necessarily being anything else. Though she told me later, with the directness of someone who'd decided she was too old for anything but honesty, that they had been something else for a period in the late 1990s, after both of their respective marriages had ended, and that it had been good while it lasted, and then it had been what it was, a genuine and lasting friendship built on radio equipment and mutual stubbornness. She'd known my name. She'd known my birthday, my job, what kind of truck I drove. My father had talked about me. He'd talked about me to Nora Bellum the way he'd never quite talked about me to me, which is a specific kind of thing to learn about a person. You can't ask about it anymore. But first, before any of that, we had to get everyone inside and deal with Joan. Joan's condition had worsened on the drive. Her color was wrong, too pale in some places, and too flushed in others, with the slightly wet look around her hairline that suggested her body was working harder than it could sustain. Donna had kept her awake and talking during the drive, which is the right instinct, though Donna was a science teacher, not a cardiologist. Nora's supply cache included medications from the shelter's original 1980s kit, supplemented by things she'd brought herself. Among the brought-herself supplies, Nora's own prescription medications, including 2 things that weren't hers specifically. Walt had heart medication, she said, going through the box with quick, practiced hands. He was on a beta blocker the last 2 years. I brought his remaining supply from his apartment after. She paused. After I knew he was gone. I didn't know why exactly. I thought it might be useful. She held up the bottle and looked at the label, and then looked at Donna. "What's she on?" Donna knew the name. It was different from what Nora had, but Nora had something similar enough, and she was also willing to give Joan half a tablet of aspirin, and she knew enough about cardiac care from decades of being a capable, curious person to explain why she was doing what she was doing. It wasn't ideal. It was what we had. Joan's color improved slightly over the next hour. Not much, but slightly. While Donna handled Joan, I went to the radio table with Nora and Conrad. The equipment she had was impressive. My father had set up this radio room over what sounded like many years of incremental improvement. The base station was a modern transceiver, not old, maybe 10 years old, capable of multiple bands including CB, VHF, and shortwave. The amplifier was the one he'd written about in the notebook, an old linear amplifier from the 1990s, big and heavy, and made like tanks were made in that era. It was currently sitting powered off. "It's been running on the battery bank," she said. "I've been broadcasting on low power, enough to cover about 20-30 miles with the repeaters helping. The signal has been reaching further because of the relay network." "The DTMF data in the broadcast," I said. "That was you. That was Walt's design. Originally, the data stream was intended to carry routing information for the repeater network, so that any operator who knew to look for it could reconfigure the network remotely. I updated the routing data myself after I got here, and I added a flag." She looked at me steadily. "A specific identifier in the header, your father's initials, so that if his son ever heard the signal and decoded it, he'd know where it came from." I sat with that. "He thought I'd decode it," I said. "He thought I'd know to look." "He hoped," she said. "He said you were better at this than you gave yourself credit for." I looked at the amplifier, the people who've been tracking the signal. "The continuity group. Their operator detected the DTMF." She nodded. "I know. I've been monitoring their traffic as well. They're about 2 hours behind you by my estimation. They lost your position when you left the elevator, and they had to re-triangulate. But they have enough of the routing data to be looking in the right general area." 2 hours, Conrad said. "Give or take," Nora said. "I've been trying to confuse their triangulation by varying the transmit pattern, but they have direction-finding equipment. Eventually, they'll find this ridge." The 3 of us sat with that for a moment. The amplifier, I said. Nora looked at it. How long would a full-power broadcast last before we lose the battery bank? I said. She thought. Did the math quickly in her head, the way engineers do. At full power on that amplifier, which is about 250 watts, we'd drain the remaining capacity in the batteries in approximately 5 to 6 hours. Longer if I'm careful about the duty cycle. And the range? At that power, with the antenna array on the ridge and the repeaters relaying. She paused. 4 counties, maybe 5. In good conditions, further. 4 or 5 counties. A lot of CB radios. A lot of potential survivors who'd been running handhelds and not getting through. We'd be painting a target, Conrad said. Full power broadcast. Anyone with direction-finding equipment zeroes in on us in an hour. Rawls, I said. Yes. I thought about the man on the van staring at the sky. The people under the bridge. The 6 survivors we'd pulled out. All the others we hadn't seen. All the CBs, sitting silent in trucks and houses and workshops, because the people holding them didn't have enough power to reach anything, and didn't know if anyone was listening. There's something else, Nora said. I looked at her. She reached under the radio table and brought out a binder. Heavy, thick, the plastic kind with 3 rings. She set it on the table in front of me. On the cover, in my father's handwriting, Regional Emergency Shelter Network, Communication Protocol, 2018 revision. He updated this 2 years before he died, she said. The last revision. It contains every shelter location, every repeater point, every access code, everything. I opened it, page after page of detailed information, maps, coordinates, access protocols. If someone had this information and radio equipment to match, they could reach survivors across an enormous area, guide them toward shelter, guide them toward each other. The continuity group, I said. Is this what they want? I think so, Nora said. The DTMF data points toward this. If they decode it completely, they get partial routing information. But if they get this binder, she stopped. They control the network. They control who knows what and who goes where. Conrad picked up the binder carefully, the way you pick up something fragile. Turned pages. This is everything Walt built. 30 years. Yes, Nora said. I looked at the amplifier, at the radio, at the binder. Then I heard something from the corridor. Owen. He was standing in the doorway between the main room and the radio room. He'd come in quietly, the way teenagers do, not intending to sneak but not making noise either. He was looking at the radio equipment with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not blank. Something else. Something awake. I said quietly, "Hey." He looked at me. Then he looked at the radio. Then he looked at the amplifier. "My granddad had one of those," he said. His voice was rusty from not being used. Quiet but present. He said it like it was nothing. Like he hadn't gone 4 days without speaking. Like it just needed to be said. I looked at him. Didn't make anything of it. Didn't react big, which I thought was right. Similar model? I don't know. It was big and old. He used to talk to people on it. Owen came into the room, stopped at the table, looked at the transceiver. He used a handle. He called himself. He stopped, searching. Something to do with birds. I thought about my father's handle. Condor. I looked at Conrad, who was watching Owen with the same careful stillness. My father called himself Condor, I said. Owen looked at me. Maybe it was a different bird. Maybe it was. I looked back at the radio. You can sit here if you want. He sat in the second chair, the one away from the main operator position. He didn't touch anything. He just sat there looking at it all, the way people sometimes sit in a place that reminds them of something they need to be near for a while. I went back to thinking about the problem. Here is what I decided, and here is how I decided it. The continuity group had roughly 2 hours on us before they triangulated this location, maybe a little more. Nora thought she could stretch it. I thought she was probably right. She'd been confusing their bearing for days, and she knew her equipment. If we shut down the transmitter and went silent, We had maybe 4 to 6 days of supplies in the shelter before we needed to ration more aggressively. The shelter could sustain 10 people for longer than that if we were careful. Nora had built up a meaningful cache over 3 weeks. Joan was stable enough, for now. The shelter entrance was heavy and lockable, and the access track was not obvious from the main road. Rawls couldn't find us if we went dark. His direction-finding equipment needed a signal to find. The 10 people in this shelter would probably be fine. Everyone else wouldn't know about any of this. All the people with handhelds that didn't reach anything. All the people under bridges or in gas stations with the music playing or standing on vans. All the people who hadn't found their way to the first coordinate, or the second, or heard the broadcast at all. The binder in front of me had not just this shelter, but 9 others. Supply caches at the repeater relay points. A functioning communication network. A map of every safe point my father had spent 30 years building. Rawls wanted it. Rawls might use it well. Was maybe even capable of using it well. He'd been organized and disciplined enough to get this far. But the way he'd stripped the Wilson farm, the way his operator talked on radio, the assumptions built into wanting to control a network rather than share it, that was a specific kind of thing. That was someone who thought centralization was the same as safety. And it isn't. And I know this because I work with radio equipment, and radio equipment fails when it's all routed through a single point. Distributed is safer. Always. If you want a signal to survive, you put it in many places, not one. My father had known this. He'd built a distributed network. I went to the amplifier. "Garrett," Conrad said. "I know," I said. "If you transmit at full power." "I know." I sat down in the operator's chair. Nora moved aside for me, but she stayed close, hands on the table, watching. I looked at Owen. He was looking at me with his new awake expression. "Can you write?" I said. "Quickly?" He looked around, found a legal pad and a pen on the shelf. Held them up. "I'm going to read coordinates," I said. "Every relay point, every shelter. Write them down." He nodded. Put the pad on his knee. I opened the binder. "Listen," I said, "to whoever might be on the radio. To whoever might be in range. To nobody at all, because the amplifier wasn't on yet. I'm going to talk into this radio, and a lot of people are going to hear it, or not hear it, and I don't know which. But the broadcast is going to go out, and after it does, we're going to figure out what happens next." I was talking to the air, or to myself, or to my father, who was not there, but whose equipment this was, whose work this was, whose shelf the binder had sat on, whose hands had done 30 years of this, and never once asked whether anyone would notice. I heard Donna come in from the main room, and then Phil, leaning in the doorway with no cigarette for once, and Lyle, and the others, crowding to the door. 10 people in a limestone shelter, waiting to see what I was going to do. I powered on the amplifier. It hummed. The way old equipment hums, low and warm, the tubes heating up. It would need 2 minutes to stabilize. I used the 2 minutes. On the secondary radio, the CB handset, I tuned to the frequency Rawls had given me. He picked up on the second call. Fast. He'd been monitoring. "Mr. Hale," he said, like a pleasant business meeting. "Mr. Rawls," I kept my voice level. "I want to explain what I'm about to do, and I want you to hear it from me first, so there's no confusion later." A pause. "All right?" "I'm going to broadcast the locations of every emergency shelter and resource cache in this county, and the 4 around it. Every repeater location, every access code, every supply point. On full power, wide area broadcast, so that anyone with a CB radio in range can hear it and write it down." Silence. "The information will be out," I said. "There'll be nothing to control or consolidate after that. It'll be in 100 different hands. That's the point." Rawls's voice came back carefully. "You understand that this is a significant decision. People who are not prepared to handle this information. People are sitting under bridges and in drainage ditches and in their attics," I said. "They don't need someone to decide if they're ready. They need the information." Another silence. Longer. You realize we'll be on site within an hour and a half. I know. That's why I'm telling you now. So you understand that coming here quickly won't change anything. It'll just be a 90-minute drive that didn't accomplish what you hoped. One more silence. And then, and I've thought about this since, turned it over, tried to read it. He said, "Your father would have done the same thing." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I put down the handset. The amplifier's hum had stabilized. I could feel it through the table surface, a low, even vibration. I looked at Nora. She reached past me and keyed the transmit. I talked for 40 minutes. I read from the binder. Every shelter location, every relay point, every access code. I read each set of coordinates twice, phonetically, the way you do it on radio so there's no ambiguity. I described how to find the trailheads, the access roads, the shed entrances. I told people about the supply caches, what was in them, roughly, how much. I told them which roads were confirmed passable and which were not, based on what we'd seen on the drive. I told them about Byers Fork and Route 108 and the alternate routes on the county roads. I told them about the infected, what I'd seen, how they moved. That sound was the primary trigger. That slow and quiet was better than fast and loud. That they couldn't climb, couldn't work latches or doors, couldn't think their way around obstacles. They just walked toward sound and bit what they reached. That this was manageable, if you managed it. I talked until I had said everything in the binder and everything in my head. Then I sat for a moment with the channel open, the amplifier humming, the antenna up on the ridge above us picking up any reply, and they started coming in. Not immediately, maybe 3 minutes of silence, which is a long silence on radio when you're waiting. Then a voice, "This is Terry Walsh, on the north end of Calvary, copying your broadcast. Can you confirm the shelter coordinates again for Grid 3? I confirmed them. Another voice, a woman. "I have 12 people in a barn on Miller Road. Can anyone confirm the road conditions between here and Route 108? I gave her what I knew. Donna, behind me, added what she knew. Another. "My name is. I'm at the fire station on Route 12. There are 11 of us. 2 of them are injured. Can someone? Give me your coordinates," I said. "We'll work out who's closest to you." Lyle had come to stand near the table. He'd been in communications. IT work, he'd said, but close enough. He started writing down call-ins on another legal pad, keeping track. Organized. Good. Within an hour, we had contact with 23 separate groups, some with 2 or 3 people, some with more than 10. One with 41, a church in the next county that had become a gathering point and had been quietly desperate for information for days. I also, and this is the part I want to be clear about, I spent about 20 minutes during that broadcast doing something else. The continuity group used Channel 30. I'd known that since the elevator, and I had the amplifier and the transceiver and enough technical knowledge to be dangerous. I routed the repeater network to broadcast a jamming signal, a low-level, broad-spectrum carrier wave, on Channel 30, and the 2 adjacent channels that Rawls's people had been using for vehicle-to-vehicle communication. It's not technically legal under normal circumstances. Nothing about these circumstances was normal. Rawls's radio operator couldn't transmit effectively. Rawls's vehicles couldn't coordinate. For a window of maybe 2 hours, which was roughly what I expected before they figured out what I'd done and adjusted, they were running with degraded communication between units. That bought time for the groups we'd contacted to start moving, to start making decisions, to not be intercepted by people who wanted to make those decisions for them. I don't know how far Rawls got with his people on the Ridge Access Road. I know he didn't reach the shelter, not that day. Whether that was the jamming or the narrow road or a decision to pull back and reassess, I don't know. I watched the road from the narrow window in the equipment shed for a while that afternoon, and I didn't see them. Maybe they came later. Maybe they decided the information was already out and there was no leverage left to work with. Maybe Rawls turned out to be, I keep going back and forth on this, something closer to capable and reasonable than I'd given him credit for. The kind of person who adjusts when the strategic situation changes, rather than burning resources on a dead outcome. I don't know. I still don't know. Day 11, 12. I've lost some of the precision. Joan is holding. Nora adjusted her medication twice based on how she was responding, and she's holding. Not good. She needs a doctor. Real cardiac care. Things we don't have, but holding. Awake and talking, which is a good sign. Owen has become the unofficial radio log keeper. He sits at the secondary position for several hours each day and records every transmission, every contact, every piece of incoming information. He doesn't transmit himself yet, but he listens and writes, and occasionally points something out to me with a look that says I should pay attention, and he's usually right. The 41-person church group made it to Grid 4, one of the shelter points in the county east of us. They went in 3 cars and arrived without any incidents, which I consider something close to a miracle, given the roads they would have crossed. They're set up and transmitting now. They've made contact with 6 smaller groups in their area. The woman with 12 people on Miller Road found a route to Grid 2 using information that Lyle pieced together from 4 separate transmissions. She reported in 2 days ago. Everyone made it. The fire station group is still where they were. 2 of their injured people can't be moved safely yet. We're in daily contact. We're working on it. Conrad has been in touch with another Signal Corps veteran, a man he knows from his Army days, who's apparently been running a generator-powered ham station from his house and has been picking up military frequencies. Actual military, not contractors. There are regular Army elements in the region, he says, moving carefully. There may be an evacuation route forming, maybe in the next 2 to 3 weeks. He has no guarantees and I'm not counting on it, but it's something. Phil fixed a small fuel leak in his flatbed using gasket material and JB weld, and now both vehicles work. He's made 3 supply runs to the Grid 2 cache, each time going at dawn, on the quiet roads, carrying supplies back in the truck bed. He came back from the second one with 4 people he'd found walking on a back road who had no idea there was anywhere to go. The man from the van, the man who said the birds know. I asked Lyle about him when I described the intersection. Lyle had come through that area. He said the van was still there, but the man wasn't, wherever he went. I hope somewhere good. I genuinely do. Let me tell you about something that happened on day 13, because it was important, and I didn't understand it immediately. I was at the radio late at night. I'd gotten into the habit of taking the late watch, listening to the frequencies while everyone else slept. The traffic had quieted down by midnight, which was normal. Most groups weren't operational overnight, except one. On a shortwave frequency, not CB, shortwave, which has much longer range, I picked up a broadcast. It was in English, clear, professional, from what sounded like a significant distance. It was listing coordinates, not our coordinates, different ones, further north and west, and a date, 11 days out. A reference to designated staging locations. I sat up straighter. Military, or military adjacent. Not the encrypted traffic Conrad's contact was monitoring. This was clear voice, which suggested it was intended to be heard. Intended for people with receivers who were listening. An evacuation staging operation, 11 days out. I spent an hour trying to cross-reference the coordinates against the regional maps. Got close enough to determine that one of the staging locations was roughly 40 miles northwest of us. Another was about 60 miles northeast. Both reachable by road, if the roads cooperated. In the morning, I told Conrad. He sat with it, the way he sits with things, not rushing, processing. "Do you trust it?" he said. "I don't know," I said. It was clear voice. If they wanted it to be heard, it was intended for survivors. That implies someone is thinking about us. Or it's being broadcast to map survivor movement, he said. Yes, I'd thought about that. Both are possible, I think. I stopped. I think we put it out on the network. Let people make their own decisions. That's the whole point of the network. He looked at me for a moment. Then, yes, that's the point. I broadcast it that morning, with appropriate caveats. I don't know if this is genuine. I can't verify it. Make your own assessment of the risk. Here's what I heard and when I heard it, and here are the coordinates. Do with that what you think is right. The fire station group, the ones with the injured people, said they would try for the northwest staging point if they could get their people mobile in time. They thought they could. The church group said they were going to wait. They had elderly and young children, and the 40 miles felt like a lot of risk for something unverified. Lyle said he would go. He said it the way you say something when you've been sitting still for long enough that stillness feels worse than risk. I haven't decided for us yet. I'll tell you when I do. Something else about the shelter that I haven't told you yet. On the second day here, when things had quieted enough that I could look around properly, I went through the main room systematically. There were things Nora had set up and things that had been here before her. The original contents from when Dad had stocked it in stages over the years. On the shelf behind the secondary cot, the cot furthest from the door, which was Nora's, or had been hers before we arrived and she'd given it to Joan, there was a small wooden box, the kind that might have held cigars originally, though the label was gone. It was held shut with a rubber band. Nora saw me find it. She said, "He left it here. He said it was for you. He said, if you never had to come here, it didn't matter, but if you came, it was yours." I sat on the edge of the cot and took the rubber band off. Inside, a letter, handwritten, my father's hand, on a piece of notebook paper folded in thirds. And under the letter, a pocket-sized photo, me and him at the farm. That trip I barely remembered. The fish. He was grinning with his eyes squinted and his arm around my shoulders, and I was looking at the fish, not the camera. And the light in the photo was the particular warm gold of a summer afternoon that doesn't feel the way it looks when you're in it, but looks perfect from a distance. I read the letter. I'm not going to tell you everything it said. Some of it is private in the way that a letter from a dead person to their living child is private, and some of it was ordinary in the way that ordinary things become extraordinary in retrospect. But there was one part that mattered for practical purposes, and I'll tell you that. He wrote, "There are things I should have said to you and didn't, and I'm putting them here where you might find them, instead of saying them out loud, which I was never good at. I know you take after me in that way, and I know it's not entirely a strength, but I want you to know that the work you do, keeping old things working, keeping the connections alive, matters more than you think it does. It matters because things that work pass something on. The signal keeps going." And then he wrote, "The network was never about disaster. It was about the possibility that someone might need it. That's enough reason to build a thing and keep it working. The signal keeps going." I sat in the shelter with the letter in my hands, and the radio humming behind me in the other room, and the sound of a dozen people talking or sleeping or moving through the space. And I thought about my father spending 30 years maintaining a network on the possibility that someone might need it. No fanfare, no announcement, no one knowing it existed until it was the only thing left. The signal keeps going. I put the letter in my shirt pocket, the photo too. I went back to the radio. There is a routine now. This is what survival actually looks like, in my experience. Not the dramatic moments, which happen and are over, but the routine that forms around them, the way scar tissue forms, protective and stiff. Mornings, water check, food inventory, generator check. The solar bank is our primary power, but we run the generator for 2 hours in the afternoon, during which we charge every battery we have. I've become meticulous about battery health in a way I only ever was before, about circuit components. Radio watch rotates. Conrad takes early morning. I take midday and late evening. Lyle takes overnight with decreasing frequency, as the nighttime traffic increases, and he needs more backup. Owen sits in on most watches now, and handles the log. Food. Nora's cache was better than I'd expected. My father had stocked it with a specific rotation in mind. He'd noted in the notebook that the cache should be cycled every 3 years, newer supplies replacing older, which he'd apparently done the last time in 2020. So most of what was here was current, not 30-year-old emergency rations. Combined with what we'd brought and what Phil has run from Grid 2, we are in a reasonable position for at least another 3 weeks, more if we're careful. Water is the trickier thing. There's a water supply in the shelter, a cistern connected to a filtration system, originally military surplus, that my father had kept maintained. It holds about 300 gallons. The filtration works. We're using it carefully. Amber has become the de facto medical person, partly because she's a biology student, and partly because she stepped into it and nobody told her not to. She checks on Joan twice a day, keeps notes, consults Nora, who knows more. She checks on everyone's hands and feet, cold injuries, infection risk, and gives short practical instructions when needed. She does it with the directness of someone who's decided that doing the thing is more useful than qualifying her competence to do it. Phil has been out 4 times now. He's developing a methodology. Pre-dawn, slow approach, no radio during movement. Check in on channel 6, only when parked and waiting. He's brought back useful things. More food, a car battery to add to our storage bank, 2 handheld radios from a house he passed that the owners had left unlocked when they fled, a bag of medical supplies from a veterinary clinic that turned out to have more overlap with human use than people might expect. He's also seen things on the road that I won't describe in detail. He comes back from these runs and smokes his second-to-last cigarette and doesn't talk for about an hour, and then he's okay. Teddy's arm is healing. Slowly. Donna reset it on day 3 of our time here, a process he bore with a quietness I found admirable. And the splint is doing what it's supposed to do. He can't lift with it. He's become the person who manages the supply organization in the main room, because he can do that with one arm, and he's turned out to be extremely good at spatial logistics, which he credits to 15 years of packing trucks. The 2 teenage brothers, the ones who looked alike, whose name I now know are Derek and Finn Kowalczyk, 16 and 15, are working, not in any structured way, just doing what needs doing when they see it needs doing. They're quieter than teenagers usually are, but they're holding together. They have each other, which helps. Lyle found a deck of cards in the supply cache. Actual playing cards. They've become the nighttime activity that means everyone's okay enough for something that isn't survival. Even Joan watches sometimes from her cot. On day 16, I made contact with Rawls. Not his radio operator, him. He came on channel 9 in the mid-morning, and when I picked up the handset, he said, "The network is working," not as an accusation, as a statement. I thought about what to say. I said, "The network was always working. There are groups moving," he said. "The Grid 4 shelter has become a waypoint now. Phil going to Grid 2 was apparently being watched, because there are people bringing their own supplies there now, and organizing northward. I know. We'd been in contact with all of it. The staging coordinates you broadcast," he said. "We've verified them. They're real. That's an actual army operation. 11 days out. 9 days now. We've been in contact with the unit." I held on to that information. "We have fuel," he said. "Vehicles. We know the roads. I'm not saying we didn't make mistakes with the Wilson situation. I'm saying," a pause, "I'm saying the binder information you broadcast is what my people needed to do this right. The network, the relay points. If we'd had that at the beginning." "At the beginning I didn't have it either," I said. A long silence. "We can help move your group to the staging area," he said, "and anyone else in range. We have the capacity." I thought about this for a long time, standing in the equipment shed, cold concrete under my feet, looking at the limestone ridge in the morning light. "Tell me about the Wilson farm," I said. He didn't answer immediately. Then, we made a decision that I would make differently now. We thought centralization was the answer. "It's not," I said. "No," he said. "You've demonstrated that." We talked for another hour. Conrad listened through most of it from the doorway. At the end, Conrad came and stood next to me, and took the handset, and talked to Rawls himself for a few minutes. Old soldier talk, the kind where experience is the only currency, and then handed it back. "He's not wrong about the vehicles," Conrad said. "I know," I said. We agreed to a meeting point. A public one, the intersection near the livestock auction barn, day 2 from now. Both groups visible to each other from the road before anyone got out of a vehicle. The meeting happened. 14 people in dark SUVs, and the LMTV, which up close was old but well-maintained. Rawls was shorter than I'd imagined from his voice. Early 50s, a soldier's posture without looking military anymore, gray at his temples. He shook my hand and held it a beat longer than a normal handshake, looking at me in the way people look at you when they've been wondering what you'd be like. "Your father and I spoke," he said, "on the radio. 3 years ago, I was running a shortwave station in Hardin County, and he contacted me about a relay point he wanted to add to the network. He stopped. He had a good signal. I almost said something. Didn't. We stood in the cold morning and negotiated logistics, which is what survival reduces to when the emergencies are temporarily held at bay. His vehicles would run the evacuation legs to the staging area. We would coordinate through the relay network to give groups advance warning and route information. No centralized control. Distributed. Every group moving on their own information, with support, not direction. He agreed. Not instantly, but he agreed. I don't entirely trust him. I want to be honest about that. I've made a working arrangement with a man whose track record includes stripping a farm, and I'm keeping my eyes open. But I think the arithmetic of the situation has changed for him, in the same way it changes for most people, once you understand that distributed is more resilient than centralized. It keeps mattering when things break down. Day 18. Joan was moved to the Grid 4 shelter, which has better facilities and people who can monitor her more closely. She was stable enough to transport. She cried when she said goodbye to Nora, which I think surprised her more than anyone. The fire station group made it to the northwest staging point. One of the injured was bad enough that they couldn't wait. They went anyway and made it. The 12 people from Miller Road are at a staging point. We've confirmed 17 separate groups moving, or at established shelters. The church group still hasn't moved. They may be waiting for the military operation to reach them. They may be right. The teenage brothers are doing better. Finn laughed at something Teddy said on day 16, and it was the first laugh I'd heard in the shelter, and it sounded so out of place, and so necessary, that half the room went quiet and then smiled. Owen transmitted for the first time yesterday. Phil was running a supply route and went quiet on the radio for longer than usual, which made us nervous, and we couldn't raise him. I was about to go after him when Owen picked up the handset and called on Channel 6 with Phil's vehicle designation, and his voice came out steady and clear and purposeful. "Phil, this is the shelter. Come back." Phil came back. The radio had been on the wrong channel by mistake. Nothing was wrong. But Owen sat there for a long moment with the handset in his hands, and I think something settled back into place for him that had been out of place for a long time. He hasn't stopped talking since. Not a lot. He's still quiet, still a thinker, but present. He's here. On day 20, I had a conversation with Nora that I want to tell you about because it's been sitting with me since. It was late. Everyone else was asleep. I was at the radio table, running the late watch, and she came in with 2 cups of tea. She'd been making tea from dried herbs she'd brought, lavender and something else, which sounds fussy, and which has been one of the small comforts that turn out to matter more than you'd predict. She sat in the second chair and handed me a cup. We didn't say anything for a while. The radio was quiet. The amplifier was off. We'd been running at regular power since the initial broadcast, which conserved the battery bank and was sufficient for our current range. "He was proud of you," she said, not looking at me, looking at the radio. I held the cup in both hands the way she holds hers. He never said. "No," she said, "he wouldn't, but he was. The way he talked about the work you were doing, keeping old equipment alive. He thought it mattered. He thought you understood it in the right way." I thought about this. What's the right way? That the thing itself is worth doing, not the recognition, not the economics of it, just, she stopped. Just that the signal keeps going. My own words coming back to me from his letter, or his words, his, that she'd heard and knew. The signal keeps going. He'd said it to her too, probably, and she was giving it back to both of us. I looked at the radio. The Cobra, my father's, sitting on the table beside the transceiver. I'd brought it from the workshop in the truck, and I'd set it up here because there was something in me that needed it here. It wasn't the most capable piece of equipment in the room. It was old, and it had a particular weight, and it had a not-for-sale tag on it in his handwriting. I didn't know him well enough, I said. It came out plain and factual, and I didn't try to make it more than that. No, she said, but you knew him some, and you knew the same things he knew about work. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. We drank tea and listened to the static, and it was quiet, and I let it be quiet. Day 22. This might be the last recording I do, at least for a while, because things are moving faster, and I don't have the spare time I had when it was just me in the barn. 2 convoys have moved to the northwest staging area using Rals's vehicles and the network routing information. 43 people total. I was in contact with each convoy the whole way, talking them through road conditions, timing, which routes were clear. They got there. Last radio check was 8 hours ago. They're at the staging area and in contact with the Army unit. The church group finally moved. They left 2 days ago, and I've been in contact with them at intervals. They're 70 miles from a staging point, moving slowly. They'll make it. I think they'll make it. The Grid 2 cache has been emptied by the groups that came through it, which means it served its purpose. Which means Dad's idea worked the way he intended it to work. Rawls's group is operating differently now. I still watch the radio traffic and I can hear it. A different tone. Less consolidation language. More relay language. More, this is what we know. And less, this is where you need to be. People adjust. Some of them. Some of the time. Conrad is talking to the Army unit through his shortwave contact. He thinks there's a second staging operation forming further east. He thinks it might reach us. He's been wrong about timelines before, and he'd be the first to tell you. But he's also been right about more important things, and I trust his judgment. I am going to stay at this radio until it doesn't make sense to stay anymore. That's what I've decided. The shelter is the center of the network, functionally, right now. The highest power point. The one that can reach the most relays, the one that has the binder and the routing information, and the people who understand how to use it. When it stops making sense to stay, I'll go. I'll figure out where to go. There's something I want to say before I finish this recording. About my father. I've been thinking about what it means that he built this thing and didn't tell me. Whether it was a failing of his, the difficulty with words, with connection, with saying the things that mattered, or whether it was something else. Whether there was a version of this where he'd sat me down and explained the network and handed me the pocket notebook while he was alive and said, "Here's what I've been doing. Here's what it's for." I don't think he knew how to do that. I don't think the gap between what he felt and what he could say was something he was capable of closing, and neither was I, and we circled each other for 38 years, never quite bridging it. But he planned for me to find this. He put my mother's birthday in the code and knew I'd know it. He left a box for me in a shelter he built on the possibility that someone might need it, and the person he most specifically meant was me. He told Nora things about me he'd never told me, and he knew she'd be here, and he knew that if the situation got bad enough, I would find my way to the radio. He was right. The signal keeps going. I've been sitting in my father's chair, this folding chair at this folding table with this radio in front of me, and doing my father's work, and I didn't know that's what I was doing until I was already doing it. That seems like a thing about parents and children that might be universal, that you don't see it clearly until you're inside it. I fixed old things for a living because he fixed old things, and I'd watched him do it, and it had gotten into me without announcement, just the way things do. I kept the signal going, because he'd kept it going, and showed me that was worth doing. I miss him. I'm going to say it plainly, because this tape recorder doesn't care about plain and it. I've been walking around it for 8 days, and I'm tired of walking around it. I miss him. I miss the version of him I knew, and the version I didn't, both. I miss the conversations we never had, and the ones we did have that I didn't pay enough attention to. I miss the way he'd say a thing once, and assume you'd understood it, and never repeat himself, which I found frustrating when I was younger, and now understand was just confidence, that you were worth being spoken to directly. I miss his hands on the equipment, the particular careful way he handled old components. I miss the fact that when I fixed something, he was always the person I most wanted to tell about it. He can't hear this tape. He can't hear any of this. But the equipment he built is still working. The network he maintained for 30 years is carrying signals through 4 counties tonight. And people who are alive because of it don't know his name and don't need to. I know his name. I'm going to keep knowing it. This is the last entry on this tape, because I just checked, and there are about 3 minutes left on the reel, and then it cuts out. Here is where we are on the morning of day 23. The radio is on. The frequencies are alive with voices. More voices than yesterday, more than the day before. Survivor groups reaching each other, sharing road information, asking questions about shelter locations that I can now answer because I have the binder. The network is functional in a way it never was designed to be, because it was designed for a smaller scenario, and what happened was larger. But the distributed design held up, which my father would have expected. Joan is at grid 4, and has been stable for 4 days. The fire station group is at the staging area. The church group is moving. The teenage brothers play cards with Teddy every evening, and Finn is better at it than he should be for his age. Owen is 3 feet from me right now, logging transmissions. He's using a color-coding system he invented himself, marking different groups in different colors. He explained it to me this morning. It's good. It's actually very good. The army operation is either real or it isn't. I've been thinking about it the way you think about things you can't verify, preparing for it without counting on it, making plans that work either way. Rawls has not tried to approach the shelter. He's been communicating by radio, not physically, and I've kept the shelter location off the record in our discussions with him. Whether he could find it if he wanted to. Probably yes, eventually. Whether he wants to, I don't think so, not anymore. People's objectives shift when the information they were trying to control becomes widely known. The leverage disappears. What's left is just logistics. I found one more note in the pocket notebook last night. I'd missed it because it was on the back of the last page, where you don't think to look. Just 3 lines, in Dad's handwriting. The antenna isn't just for sending, it's for listening. If you listen long enough, you'll hear what you need. I heard you, Dad. Eventually. Okay, 3 minutes are nearly up. The cobra's on the table, the indicator light green, the squelch set low, and it's picking up everything it can pick up. The frequencies are open, and the voices are coming through. All those people out there talking to each other across distances that would have been silence a week ago. Asking questions, sharing coordinates, checking in. Some of them are calm, some are frightened. Most of them sound like people who've decided to keep going, which is the only decision that matters. I'm going to turn this tape off, and key the mic, and listen for a while. If you find this tape and you're in the Breeden area or the surrounding counties, if you have a CB or a shortwave or anything that receives, Channel 9 is where we are. The shelter at Grid 9 is real, and it works, and the code is a date that I can tell you over the air when you ask. And if you knew Walt Hale, if he fixed something of yours once, or talked to you on this radio, or if you knew him in any of the ways people knew him that I didn't, I'd like to know about it. I have a tape recorder, and some time, and a lot of questions I'm still working on asking. My name is Garrett Hale. I'm at the radio. I'm listening. Come back. What happened after day 23? I'm adding this on a second tape. A TDK 90-minute I found in the supply cache. Someone's mixtape. Over-recorded. That I needed for this. The Army staging operation was real. Not as large as it might have been. Probably a quarter of what you'd have hoped for in a properly organized response. Which is what you get when the response is improvised and regional and piecemeal. But real. 2 staging areas, north and west, operating about 5 days after the broadcast. They came through with the resources they had, and moved people, and made decisions about what was possible. The church group made it. I was on the radio when they checked in from the northwest staging area. 76 people. They'd picked up more along the way, and they were exhausted and safe. And the woman who led them, who I'd only known as a voice on Channel 9, cried over the radio when she confirmed their arrival, and I let her cry, and didn't say anything until she was ready. Rawls's people were at the staging area, organized and useful. The vehicles helped. Whatever else he was effective at logistics, and the staging operations needed that. I've thought about the Wilson family, whose farm was stripped. I think about them when I think about Rawls. I don't resolve it. I just hold both things at the same time. We left the shelter on day 28. Conrad and Teddy and the teenage brothers went north with the first convoy Rawls ran. Owen went with them, which surprised me. I'd expected him to stay near the radio, but Phil was on that convoy, and I think that mattered to him. They got through. Donna stayed with Joan at Grid 4 until the evacuation unit reached them. She told me on the radio that she'd started writing everything down, everything she knew about the medical work, about the food rationing, about how to run a shelter, that it might be useful later. I told her I thought it definitely would. Amber is still at the shelter with me and Nora, as of this recording, the three of us. Amber says she's going to work in public health when this is over, which made Nora smile in a specific way. Amber goes to sleep thinking about the biology of the infection and wakes up talking about it, which is either morbid or scientific depending on your perspective. I think it's the right perspective. The staging area has communication equipment now, and I've been relaying through the Army network. Someone there recognized my father's repeater coordinates. An older officer who'd been involved in something called the Regional Amateur Radio Emergency Service, which was a different but parallel program to Dad's civil defense network. He knew the name Walt Hale. He said, "That network's been sending us signals for 3 weeks. We couldn't figure out where it was centered." He sounded like he meant it as a compliment, and I took it as one. Last week I drove out to the Haskell's gas station on Route 84. I don't know exactly why. I needed to see it. The pumps were off now, finally drained, or the power finally cut. The sign was still there. The lights were off. The store was unlocked, as I'd left it with the cash on the counter. The cash was gone. The CD player was gone. Someone had been there. I like to think that's a good sign. I like to think someone came in, took what they needed, maybe saw the money and took it, because it seemed strange to leave, and left. The Dwight Yoakam CD was still on the counter, though. I took it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to play it, but it seemed like something to take. The last thing I want to say. My mother's name is Eleanor. I have been thinking about her. I don't know where she is, or if she's okay. I hope she is. I hope someone helped her the way this network helped people we never met. I hope whoever found her told her there were shelter coordinates on Channel 9 and that she wrote them down. If somehow, in some future circumstance where tape recorders still work, she hears this, "Hi, Mom. It's Garrett. I'm okay. And I want to tell you that your birthday is what opened the shelter door. Dad kept it all these years. I wanted you to know." And to my father, the network worked. The signal kept going. I'm going to drive back to the shelter now and make sure the radio is still on and still reaching.